r/malicious compliance grandma disinherited me, so I already bought her house. The gavel came down with a satisfying crack that echoed through the courthouse steps. Sold to bidder 47 for $340,000. I kept my face perfectly neutral as the auctioneer's assistant handed me the paperwork, but inside I was doing cartwheels. The Victorian mansion that had been in my family for 4 generations, the same house my grandmother swore I'd never deserve, was now mine. And I'd just bought it for less than the cost of my cousin Derek's new Tesla. Congratulations on your purchase, the county clerk said, stamping the documents. That's quite a steal for a property that size. If only she knew. 6 months ago, I was completely written out of Grandma Eleanor's will. Not just reduced inheritance, completely erased, like I'd never existed. The family lawyer delivered the news with all the warmth of a tax audit. The $2.3 million estate, including the 6,000 square foot mansion on Maple Hill, would go entirely to Derek. The golden child. The one who married his college sweetheart at 24, became a corporate lawyer, and never once questioned Grandma's vision of what success should look like. Me? I was 28, single, and flipping houses for a living. According to Eleanor, I was wasting my potential on blue-collar nonsense and gallivanting around instead of settling down like a proper adult. Never mind that my blue-collar nonsense had netted me over $800,000 in liquid assets and a portfolio of rental properties. Never mind that I genuinely loved what I did. The last conversation we had still burned in my memory. I'd driven 3 hours to visit her in that massive house, bringing her favorite lemon bars from the bakery downtown. She was sitting in her usual spot, the wingback chair by the bay window where afternoon light streamed across her crossword puzzles. I found a lovely girl from the country club, she announced without preamble. Margaret Wellington's granddaughter. She's 26, works at the museum, very refined. I'm arranging a dinner. Grandma, I told you I'm not interested in being set up. And I've told you that if you continue down this reckless path, there will be consequences. Her voice could have frozen July. Derek understands family responsibility. Derek appreciates legacy. Derek will inherit what your great-great-grandfather built because Derek respects tradition. I should have seen it coming. But some naive part of me thought blood still meant something. That the summers I'd spent in that house, learning to garden in her rose beds and listening to her stories about our ancestors, had counted for something. The day of her funeral, Derek pulled me aside after the service. His wife Emma hovered nearby, clutching their toddler and looking appropriately mournful in her designer black dress. Look, I know this is awkward, Derek said, straightening his tie. But the property taxes alone are killing me. 28 grand a year, plus maintenance, utilities. I'm hemorrhaging money on this place. I made appropriately sympathetic noises while mentally calculating. Derek made good money, but he also had a mortgage, student loans, and a lifestyle that matched his inflated ego. The mansion was going to bleed him dry. I might have to sell, he admitted, and I saw the first crack in his perfect facade. That's when I knew. Derek had wanted the inheritance for what it represented, validation, status, beating me. He'd never actually wanted the responsibility that came with it. I started making phone calls that afternoon. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was sitting in my downtown office when my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Hey, know anyone who might want to rent the mansion? Emma thinks we should Airbnb it. I nearly choked on my coffee. The idea of strangers tramping through Grandma Eleanor's meticulously maintained home, probably throwing parties in the formal dining room where she'd hosted Christmas dinner for 60 years, made my stomach turn. But it also told me everything I needed to know about Derek's financial situation. Might have some contacts, I texted back. What kind of rent are you thinking? $8,000 a month? Emma found some comparables online. I had to give Emma credit, she'd done her homework. That was actually reasonable for the market. But Derek clearly hadn't thought through the logistics. Short-term rentals in that neighborhood required special permits, insurance modifications, and constant maintenance. The mansion's 1890s plumbing and electrical system weren't exactly built for the wear and tear of weekend warriors. Instead of pointing this out, I played along. Let me ask around. What I actually did was call my friend Marcus, who worked in the city planning department. Hey, hypothetical question, I said. If someone wanted to run an Airbnb on Maple Hill, what would they need? Marcus laughed. In that historic district? Good luck. The Homeowners Association has been fighting vacation rentals for 3 years. Plus you'd need a conditional use permit, which requires neighbor approval, parking assessments, the whole 9 yards. I've seen people spend $15,000 in legal fees just to get denied. Perfect. I let Derek figure that out on his own. It took him 2 months of bureaucratic hell and a $3,000 consultation fee to a zoning lawyer before he finally gave up on the Airbnb idea. By then, I could practically hear the desperation in his voice when he called. The realtor thinks we could list for $1.8 million, he said, trying to sound casual. Market's hot right now. I made a noncommittal sound. The market was hot, but Derek's realtor was either incompetent or blowing smoke. The mansion needed a new roof, foundation work, and complete electrical updates. Any serious buyer would spot those issues immediately and negotiate accordingly. More importantly, I'd already started working my contacts. The real estate world in our city was smaller than people realized, and I'd spent 5 years building relationships with inspectors, appraisers, and contractors. Word traveled fast about properties with problems. When Derek's listing went live, I watched from the sidelines as showing after showing fell through. The first potential buyer's inspector found asbestos in the basement ceiling. The second couple's mortgage company balked at the foundation issues. A cash investor made an insultingly low offer that Derek rejected out of pride. Meanwhile, the property taxes were still due. The heating bill for that massive house was astronomical. Derek had taken out a bridge loan to cover the immediate expenses, banking on a quick sale that wasn't materializing. By month 4, I started seeing the subtle signs of panic. Derek stopped posting vacation photos on social media. Emma traded her BMW for a Honda. They put their own house on the market, upgrading, according to the Facebook announcement, but I knew better. The final nail came when Derek called me directly, his voice tight with stress. I don't suppose you'd be interested in the mansion? Family discount? I let the silence stretch just long enough to hear him squirm. I might know someone, I said finally. What kind of timeline are you working with? Soon, he admitted. Really soon. That's when I knew I had him. The foreclosure notice appeared in the legal section of the Sunday paper exactly 2 weeks later. I was drinking my morning coffee when I spotted it, buried between bankruptcy filings and tax lien announcements. 1247, Maple Hill Drive, notice of default and election to sell. Derek had finally hit the wall. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Janet Morrison. We'd worked together on dozens of deals, and she knew better than to ask too many questions when I had that particular tone in my voice. I need you to look into a foreclosure auction, I said, reading her the property details. Timeline, competing bidders, the works. Maple Hill? Janet whistled low. That's prime real estate. You sure you want to get into a bidding war with the big players? That was exactly what I was counting on, or rather, the lack thereof. The big investment firms that usually dominated these auctions preferred newer properties or complete teardowns. The mansion sat awkwardly in the middle, too expensive to flip quickly, too much of a restoration project for most rental portfolios. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that house like my own heartbeat. I'd spent summers crawling through its crawl spaces with my grandfather, learning which floorboards creaked and where the original builder had cut corners. I knew the foundation issues were mostly cosmetic, settling that looked dramatic but wasn't structural. I knew the asbestos problem was limited to one small section that could be abetted for under $5,000. And I knew the electrical, while outdated, had been partially updated in the 90s by a contractor who'd done solid work but hadn't pulled permits. To an inspector doing a quick walkthrough for some out-of-town buyer, these were deal breakers. To me, they were negotiating points. Do me a favor, I told Janet. Set up an LLC. Something generic, Maple Holdings or whatever. I want the bidding registration completely separate from my name. The next few weeks were delicate. I had to resist every instinct to reach out to Derek, to offer him some face-saving exit strategy. Part of me, the part that remembered him teaching me to ride a bike when we were kids, wanted to throw him a lifeline. But every time I softened, I remembered Grandma Eleanor's funeral, how he'd stood at the podium talking about preserving family legacy while secretly planning to turn her home into a party house for strangers. I drove past the mansion twice during those weeks, ostensibly checking on other properties in the neighborhood. The yard was already showing signs of neglect. Derek had clearly stopped paying for landscaping, and the rose garden Grandma had tended for 30 years was being choked by weeds. That hurt more than I'd expected. The second time I drove by, I saw Derek's car in the driveway. Through the bay window, I could see him in Grandma's old chair, head in his hands. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the lawyer reading me that will, Derek's barely concealed smirk when he thought I wasn't looking. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. Janet called me 3 days before the auction with intelligence that made my pulse quicken. Only 4 registered bidders, she reported. 2 flippers from out of state who've probably never seen the property, 1 local investor I recognize, he's bottom feeding, won't go above $300,000. And us. What about Derek? Any last-minute redemption attempts? Nothing. Either he's given up, or he's completely tapped out. I suspected both. The foreclosure process had a way of breaking people, especially people who'd never imagined they could fail. Derek had probably spent the last month frantically calling everyone he knew, looking for miracle solutions that didn't exist. The irony wasn't lost on me. All my life, Derek had been the golden child while I was the family disappointment. Now our positions were about to reverse in the most spectacular way possible. The morning of the auction, I woke up at 4 a.m. with my stomach in knots. I'd been to dozens of these sales, but this one felt different. Personal. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to focus on the practical aspects, cashier's check, registration paperwork, bidding strategy. Anything to avoid thinking about what I was really doing. My phone buzzed at 6:30. Derek's name on the caller ID made my chest tighten. Sarah? I know this is weird, but are you still in touch with any serious investors? His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept. In the background, I could hear Emma talking in rapid, stressed whispers to someone, probably her parents. Maybe, I said carefully. Why? The auction's today. I've got one last chance to sell privately before. He trailed off, unable to say the words. I'm asking $500,000. I know it's low, but I just need to walk away clean, you know? $500,000. 6 months ago, Derek had inherited a $2.3 million estate free and clear. Now he was desperate to sell at a quarter of that value just to escape his debt spiral. That's rough, man. I can make some calls. What I didn't tell him was that I was planning to get it for even less. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my reflection in the black coffee. Was I really doing this? Taking advantage of my own cousin's desperation to reclaim a house that, technically, had never been mine to begin with? Then I thought about Grandma Eleanor's rose garden, choked with weeds because Derek couldn't be bothered to maintain it. I thought about him trying to rent out her bedroom to strangers. I thought about every family dinner where he'd gotten praised for his stability while my accomplishments were dismissed as playing around. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about saving the house from someone who'd never deserved it. I arrived at the courthouse an hour early, dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, nothing that screamed serious money. The other bidders were easy to spot, 2 guys in cheap suits clutching manila folders full of printouts, and Robert Chen, a local investor I'd seen at these things before. Robert nodded at me with professional courtesy. Interesting property, he said. Foundation issues, though. I'm thinking $280,000 max. I made agreeable noises while internally celebrating. If Robert was capping himself at $280,000, I had more room than I'd expected. The auctioneer started the bidding at $200,000. The out-of-state flippers jumped in immediately, clearly working off some algorithm that told them anything under $350,000 was profitable. They pushed each other up to $270,000 before Robert entered with $275,000. I waited. Patience was everything at these auctions. One flipper dropped out at $290,000. The other hung on until $310,000 before shaking his head and walking away. That left Robert and me. $315,000, Robert called. $320,000, I responded calmly. Robert glanced at me, probably trying to figure out my angle. He'd seen me at smaller auctions but never competing for anything this size. After a long pause, he bid $325,000. $330,000. This time Robert's pause stretched longer. I could see him calculating purchase price, renovation costs, holding expenses, potential profit margin. At $330,000 plus the work needed, the numbers were getting tight for a typical investor. But I wasn't a typical investor. This was my family home, and I knew exactly what it was worth and what it would cost to fix. $335,000, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. $340,000. Robert stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head and stepped back. Too rich for my blood. The auctioneer looked around for any other bidders. Going once, going twice. That's when I saw him. Derek stood at the back of the courthouse steps, partially hidden behind a pillar. His face was pale, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He was watching his inheritance, his grandmother's final gift to him, get sold for pocket change, and he looked absolutely shattered. For a split second, I almost pulled out. Almost let someone else have it. Then the gavel fell. The paperwork signing felt surreal. My hand moved automatically, signing documents that transferred ownership of my childhood sanctuary to an LLC I'd created specifically for this moment. The county clerk stamped each page with bureaucratic efficiency, completely unaware that she was witnessing the culmination of 6 months of careful maneuvering. You'll need to arrange insurance within 30 days, she said, handing me a thick manila envelope. And there's already a lien filed for unpaid property taxes, $31,847. That'll need to be settled before you can take possession. I nodded, having expected this. Derek had probably stopped paying the moment he realized the foreclosure was inevitable. Another $32,000 was nothing compared to what I'd just saved, but it was one more nail in his financial coffin. As I walked down the courthouse steps, clutching the deed to 1247 Maple Hill Drive, I spotted Derek leaning against his car in the parking lot. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, and when he looked up at me approaching, his eyes were red-rimmed. Sarah. His voice was barely above a whisper. Derek. I stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. In all my planning, I'd somehow never prepared for this moment, facing him immediately after buying his inheritance out from under him. I saw you bidding. He straightened up, trying to salvage some dignity. Didn't know you were in the market for something that size. It came up suddenly, I said, which was technically true. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Suddenly. Right. He ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture he'd made since we were kids whenever he was stressed. Emma's parents are letting us stay with them for a while. Until we figure things out. The golden child, reduced to living in his in-law's spare bedroom. 6 months ago, he'd been the heir to a family fortune. Now he was essentially homeless, drowning in debt from trying to maintain a property he'd never understood. Derek, Do you know what the worst part is? He interrupted. It's not the money. It's not even losing the house. It's knowing that Grandma Eleanor was wrong about everything. That caught me off guard. What do you mean? She always said you were irresponsible. Reckless. Said you'd blow through any inheritance in a year and end up broke. He looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. But here you are, buying million-dollar properties with cash while I can't even cover property taxes on a house I got for free. The weight of what I'd done started settling in. This wasn't just about reclaiming family property or proving a point. I'd systematically destroyed my cousin's financial life, watched him spiral into debt and desperation, and then swooped in to profit from his failure. You could have helped me, he said quietly. When I called this morning, asking about investors. You could have told me you were interested. Would you have sold to me? The question hung in the air between us. We both knew the answer. Derek's pride would never have allowed him to sell the family mansion to the cousin who'd been written out of the will. He'd rather lose everything to strangers than admit I might have been worthy of Grandma Eleanor's legacy all along. Probably not, he admitted finally. But we'll never know now, will we? A car pulled into the parking lot, Emma's Honda, with her parents' car following behind. Emma got out first, took one look at Derek's face and my manila envelope, and immediately understood what had happened. You bought it, she said to me. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Emma had always been sharper than Derek gave her credit for. She probably figured out weeks ago that their financial situation was hopeless. For how much? Derek asked. $340,000. The number hit him like a physical blow. He'd inherited a $2.3 million estate and lost it for less than the price of a luxury car. Emma put her arm around his shoulders, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuinely bad about what I'd done. We need to go, Emma said gently, steering Derek toward their car. My dad's making dinner. As they drove away, Derek didn't look back. I stood in that parking lot for 20 minutes after they drove away, staring at the manila envelope like it might explode. The deed inside represented everything I'd worked for, revenge, vindication, reclaiming my family legacy. So why did I feel like I was going to throw up? My phone buzzed. A text from my business partner Jake. How'd the auction go? You get that flip property on Oakwood? Right. I told everyone I was bidding on a different house entirely. The lies were already starting to pile up, and I hadn't even taken possession yet. Got it, I texted back. Need to handle some paperwork. Talk tomorrow. The drive to Maple Hill felt like a funeral procession. Every turn brought back memories, the corner where Grandma Eleanor used to take me for ice cream after doctor visits, the park where our family held 4th of July picnics back when we actually functioned as a family. By the time I pulled into the circular driveway, my hands were shaking. The house looked worse up close. 6 months of Derek's neglect had taken their toll. Paint was peeling around the window frames, gutters were clogged with decomposing leaves, and someone had left a stack of newspapers by the front door that had turned into a soggy, moldering pile. But it was still magnificent. Still the grand Victorian that had housed 4 generations of my family, with its wraparound porch and bay windows and the turret room where I used to read for hours as a kid. I walked around to the backyard and immediately wanted to cry. Grandma Eleanor's prize-winning rose garden, her absolute pride and joy, was a disaster. Weeds had taken over completely, choking out decades of careful cultivation. The arbor where she'd grown her climbing roses was collapsing under the weight of dead vines. "Excuse me, are you the new owner?" I spun around to find an elderly woman standing at the property line, holding a pair of gardening shears. She had to be in her 70s, with silver hair and dirt under her fingernails. "I'm Margaret Chen," she continued. "I live next door. I was wondering, that is, I hope you're planning to restore the gardens. Eleanor would be heartbroken to see them like this." Margaret Chen. The name clicked. She was Robert Chen's mother. The same Robert who'd been bidding against me just hours ago. "You knew my grandmother?" "Oh my goodness, your family." Her face lit up. "Eleanor talked about you all the time. Sarah, right? The one who fixes up houses?" I nodded, surprised. Grandma Eleanor had talked about me? To her neighbors? "She was so proud of your work," Margaret continued. "Always showing me pictures of your projects on her phone. That Victorian you restored downtown? She must have shown me those before and after photos 20 times. This hit me like a brick. She was proud? Oh yes, dear. She just worried you were working too hard, not taking time for yourself. She used to say you had more grit than the rest of the family combined, but she was afraid you'd burn yourself out." I stared at Margaret, trying to process this information. If Grandma Eleanor had been proud of me, if she'd understood my work better than I thought, then why had she cut me out of the will so completely? "I was sorry to see what happened with the inheritance," Margaret said gently. "Eleanor was complicated. She had very specific ideas about how things should be done." "Did she ever say why she left everything to Derek?" Margaret's expression grew uncomfortable. "It's not really my place to say. Please. I need to understand." She sighed, setting down her gardening shears. "Eleanor was terrified you'd sell this place. She saw how you bought and flipped other properties, and she was convinced you'd do the same here. She thought Derek would preserve it, keep it in the family." The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Grandma Eleanor had disinherited me to prevent me from selling the house, so she'd left it to Derek, who'd immediately tried to turn it into an Airbnb and then lost it to foreclosure. "She never asked what I actually wanted," I said quietly. "No, she didn't. Eleanor wasn't good at asking. She was better at deciding." Margaret paused. "But for what it's worth, I think she'd be happy it's back with someone who truly loves it." After Margaret went back to her own yard, I sat on the porch steps and called my lawyer. "Janet, I need you to research something. The original will, were there any earlier versions? Any changes made close to the end?" "That's an interesting question." "Why?" "Just, humor me." She called back an hour later with news that made my stomach drop. "There were 3 versions of that will, Sarah. The first one, from 2 years ago, left everything split between you and Derek equally. The second one, from 8 months ago, gave you the house and him the liquid assets. The final version, signed just 2 weeks before she died, cut you out entirely. 2 weeks before she died. Right after our last fight, when I'd refused her setup attempt and stormed out without saying goodbye." "What changed her mind?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I already knew. "I can't say for certain, but the lawyer's notes mention a heated family disagreement that convinced her you weren't ready for the responsibility." I hung up and stared at the house that had cost me everything, my relationship with my grandmother, my cousin's respect, and apparently my own peace of mind. I'd won, but it felt an awful lot like losing. That's when I noticed the car pulling up behind mine. A black sedan with government plates. The man who stepped out of the sedan looked like he'd been pressed from the same mold as every other government bureaucrat I'd ever met, gray suit, clipboard, and the kind of mustache that screamed I take myself very seriously. He approached with the purposeful stride of someone about to ruin my day. "Miss Sarah Mitchell?" He consulted his clipboard. "I'm Tom Hendricks from the city's Historical Preservation Office. I understand you're the new owner of this property." My stomach dropped. In all my careful planning, I'd somehow forgotten that the mansion sat in the middle of a designated historic district. I forced a smile. "That's right. Just closed today." "Excellent timing then." His return smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. "I'm here to inform you that this property has been flagged for potential landmark status. The Victorian Society filed a petition last month." "Landmark status?" I repeated, though I knew exactly what that meant. Months of bureaucratic delays, restrictions on any modifications, and approval requirements for everything down to paint colors. I wasn't aware of any pending applications. "The previous owner was notified," Hendricks said, making a note on his clipboard. "Mr. Derek Mitchell. I assume he passed along the information during your negotiations?" Of course Derek hadn't mentioned it. He'd probably seen the notice in his mail and ignored it, just like he'd ignored everything else about maintaining this property. Now his oversight was about to become my nightmare. "What exactly does landmark status entail?" I asked, though I was already calculating how this would destroy my renovation timeline. "Complete historical review of any proposed changes. Original materials must be preserved wherever possible. Any work requires pre-approval from our Architectural Review Board, which meets monthly." He handed me a thick packet of forms. "The good news is, if approved, you'll qualify for significant tax credits. Tax credits that would take years to materialize, assuming I could navigate the bureaucratic maze without losing my mind first." I flipped through the packet, my heart sinking with each page of regulations. "There's also the matter of the environmental assessment," Hendricks continued cheerfully. "The property was flagged during the foreclosure process for potential contamination issues." "What kind of contamination?" "The lot adjacent to your rear property line housed a dry cleaner from 1952 to 1987. There's a possibility of groundwater contamination from perchloroethylene. Nothing definitive, but it'll need to be tested before any major renovation work can begin." "Perfect. Environmental testing could take months and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Even if it came back clean, the mere possibility of contamination would complicate every aspect of the restoration." My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Hey, saw your car on Maple Hill. Thought you were bidding on Oakwood? What's the story?" I was running out of lies to explain why I was parked outside a mansion that definitely wasn't the modest flip property I'd claimed to be pursuing. Soon people would start asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. "How long do I have to respond to this?" I asked Hendricks, gesturing to the packet. Initial documentation is due within 30 days of ownership transfer. The environmental assessment should be scheduled within 60 days. He paused, studying the house with the eye of someone who'd never had to actually pay for a restoration. Beautiful property, though. They don't make them like this anymore. As his sedan disappeared down Maple Hill Drive, I stood in my newly acquired driveway holding a stack of paperwork that represented months of delays and bureaucratic hell. The house I'd fought so hard to claim was about to become a regulatory nightmare that would test every ounce of patience and resources I had. My phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. Sarah? We need to talk. I stared at Derek's name on my phone screen, my finger hovering over the decline button. The last thing I needed right now was another emotional confrontation while I was still processing the bureaucratic nightmare I just inherited. But something in my gut told me to answer. What's up, Derek? His voice was strained, almost panicked. Are you still at the house? Don't sign anything else. Don't talk to anyone else. I'm coming over. Derek, what are you? Just wait for me. Please. There's something you need to know about that property before you get in too deep. The line went dead. I stood there holding my phone, watching the sun cast long shadows across the overgrown garden. Derek's tone had been urgent in a way that had nothing to do with his wounded pride or financial desperation. This was something else entirely. 20 minutes later, his Honda pulled into the driveway behind my truck. Derek got out alone, no Emma this time, and walked toward me with the determined stride of someone who'd made a difficult decision. You bought the house, he said without preamble. Which means you're about to get hit with problems I should have warned you about months ago. What kind of problems? Though given my conversation with Hendricks, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Derek ran his hands through his hair, that old nervous gesture. Remember Uncle Bill? Dad's brother who used to visit when we were kids? I nodded. Bill had been the family black sheep, the uncle who showed up drunk to Christmas dinner and always had some get-rich-quick scheme that never panned out. Well, it turns out Uncle Bill had bigger problems than anyone realized. The kind that involved federal agencies and asset seizure. My blood turned cold. What are you talking about? 3 weeks ago, I got a visit from the FBI. Financial Crimes Division. They wanted to know about any business dealings Bill might have had with Grandma Eleanor, any money transfers, any assets that might have been purchased with questionable funds. The packet of forms from the city suddenly felt heavier in my hands. Derek, what did Uncle Bill do? Money laundering, mostly. Small-time stuff that flew under the radar for years, until it didn't. The feds traced some of his transactions back to payments he made to Grandma Eleanor. Payments she used for house renovations in 2018. I thought back to 2018, trying to remember what work had been done. The kitchen renovation. The new roof. The foundation repairs that had somehow never been properly documented. How much money are we talking about? I asked, though I was starting to understand why Derek had been so eager to unload the property. $87,000. All traced back to Bill's operation. Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. The FBI thinks Grandma Eleanor knew exactly where the money came from. They think she was a willing participant. The idea of my grandmother, rigid, proper, law-and-order Grandma Eleanor, knowingly laundering money was absurd. But the timing made terrible sense. She'd been struggling financially after Grandpa's medical bills, and Uncle Bill had always been good at making dirty money sound like family generosity. What does this mean for the property? Asset forfeiture. If they can prove the renovations were purchased with criminal proceeds, they can seize the portions of the house that were improved with that money. The kitchen, the roof, the foundation work, all of it. My mind raced through the implications. I'd just bought a house that was potentially subject to federal seizure. Even if I could prove I was an innocent purchaser, the legal battle alone would cost more than the property was worth. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because I was hoping it would go away. The agents said they were focusing on bigger fish, that Grandma Eleanor was probably just a victim. But then the foreclosure happened, and new ownership triggers a whole new level of scrutiny. So you let me buy a contaminated asset. Derek's face flushed. You want to talk about letting people buy contaminated assets? You watched me drown for months. You could have warned me about the permit issues, the real condition of the foundation, the property tax situation. You inherited it for free, Derek. I bought it fair and square. With information I didn't have. His voice cracked. You think I wanted this to happen? You think I wanted to lose everything? We stood there in the driveway, two cousins who'd grown up together, who'd built forts in these very trees, now facing each other like adversaries over a property that might belong to neither of us. My phone buzzed with another text from Jake. Seriously, what's going on? Your truck's been parked there for 3 hours. The lies were piling up, the complications multiplying, and I was starting to wonder if winning this house had been worth destroying everything else in the process. There's more, Derek said quietly. The FBI wants to interview you. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Interview me? Why the hell would they want to interview me? Derek pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of an email. Because you just purchased property that's under federal investigation. They want to know how you knew to bid, what your connection is to the family, whether you had any prior knowledge of Uncle Bill's activities. I stared at the email header, FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. This was really happening. Derek, I had nothing to do with Uncle Bill's mess. I barely saw him after we turned 18. I know that, and you know that. But to them, you're a real estate investor who somehow knew exactly when to swoop in and buy this place for pennies on the dollar. They're wondering if you've been planning this for months, if maybe you knew about the federal investigation and were counting on me losing the house. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. I had been planning this for months, just not for the reasons the FBI suspected. When do they want to meet? Friday. Agent Morrison said it's just a preliminary interview, nothing formal. But Sarah. Derek's voice dropped. You need a lawyer. A good one. Because if they decide you were somehow involved in Bill's operation, or if they think you conspired to hide assets, this stops being a civil matter. My phone started ringing. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and I realized I couldn't keep avoiding his calls without raising even more suspicions. I have to take this, I told Derek, stepping away. Sarah, where the hell are you? Jake's voice was sharp with concern. I drove by the Oakwood property, and there's no auction activity, no courthouse notices, nothing. But your truck's been parked on Maple Hill all afternoon. I closed my eyes, knowing I was about to make everything infinitely more complicated. Jake, I need to tell you something, but I need you to keep it quiet until I figure out how to handle this. Handle what? You're starting to scare me. I bought my grandmother's house today. The mansion. It's a long story, but I've been planning this for months. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, Jesus Christ, Sarah. That's not a house, that's a money pit with a historic preservation target painted on its back. Please tell me you had it properly inspected. There are some complications. What kind of complications? I glanced back at Derek, who was pacing the driveway like a caged animal. The federal kind. Another long pause. I'm coming over. Don't make any more decisions until I get there. After I hung up, Derek walked back over. His face had gone pale. I just got another text from Agent Morrison, he said, holding up his phone. They moved up your interview. They want to see you tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Why the rush? Because someone else contacted them about the sale. Someone who told them you'd been tracking this property for months, that you had inside knowledge about the foreclosure timeline. My stomach dropped. Who would know that? Derek's expression turned grim. Robert Chen called me an hour ago. He wanted to know how someone with your portfolio suddenly had the cash and knowledge to outbid him on a property he'd been researching for weeks. He thinks you had advance information about the environmental issues, the permitting problems, everything that scared off the other bidders. Robert Chen. The investor who'd backed out at $335,000. His mother Margaret, who'd told me about my grandmother's pride in my work. I'd been so focused on Derek, I'd completely overlooked how suspicious my successful bid might look to other professionals in the business. Robert thinks I was working with inside information? He thinks you were working with me. That we planned this whole thing together, me losing the house, you buying it cheap, then splitting the profits once you flipped it. The web of suspicion was tightening around both of us, and I was starting to realize that my careful revenge plot had created a conspiracy theory that might destroy us both. Jake arrived 15 minutes later, took one look at my face and Derek's panicked pacing, and immediately went into crisis management mode. Okay, everybody calm down, he said, pulling out a legal pad. Sarah, walk me through exactly what you bought and how you bought it. Derek, I need you to explain this federal investigation thing from the beginning. And nobody leaves anything out. For the next hour, I laid out my entire scheme, the months of watching Derek struggle, the strategic non-interference, the LLC setup, everything. Derek filled in the Uncle Bill situation and the FBI interest. Jake took notes with the methodical precision of someone who'd helped clients navigate regulatory disasters before. This is bad, Jake said finally, but it's not catastrophic. Yet. The key is getting ahead of the narrative before it solidifies. What narrative? I asked. The one where you and Derek conspired to defraud the government, hide assets from federal seizure, and manipulate a foreclosure sale for personal gain. He tapped his pen against the pad. Because that's exactly what this looks like from the outside. Derek sank down onto the porch steps. I never should have let this get so far. I should have just told Sarah about the FBI investigation months ago. Why didn't you? Jake asked. Because I was embarrassed. Because I thought maybe if I sold the house quickly and quietly, the whole thing would just go away. Because I didn't want to admit that our perfect grandmother might have been involved in money laundering. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Mitchell? This is Agent Morrison with the FBI. I believe your cousin spoke with you about scheduling an interview? I looked at Jake, who was frantically making keep-it-brief gestures. Yes, Agent Morrison. I understand you'd like to meet. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at our downtown office. This is just a preliminary conversation about your recent property purchase. You're welcome to bring counsel if you'd prefer. I'll be bringing my lawyer, I said, ignoring Jake's surprised look. We'd worked together for years, but he wasn't a criminal attorney. Of course. We'll see you tomorrow. After I hung up, Jake was already dialing. I'm calling Patricia Reeves. Best white-collar defense attorney in the city. If the FBI is moving this fast, you need someone who specializes in federal cases. While Jake made his call, Derek and I sat in uncomfortable silence on the porch of the house that had brought us both nothing but trouble. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the neglected garden. You know what the really twisted part is? Derek said eventually. Grandma Eleanor would be mortified that Uncle Bill's mess is threatening this place. She spent her whole life trying to protect the family reputation. Maybe she should have thought about that before taking his money. You think she really knew? I considered this. Honestly? I think she knew Bill was shady, but I don't think she wanted to know the details. She needed the money for repairs, and he offered it, and she convinced herself it was legitimate family help. Jake finished his call and walked back over. Patricia can meet with you at 8 a.m. tomorrow, before the FBI interview. She wants to review all the documents tonight, the purchase paperwork, the foreclosure notices, any communications you had with Derek about the property. Communications? My heart sank. Jake, I never told Derek I was bidding. He found out when I won. That's actually good. It supports the narrative that you were working independently. He paused. But Sarah, she needs to know about Robert Chen's suspicions. If he's already talked to the FBI, they're going to ask you directly about insider information. A car pulled up behind Jake's truck. Margaret Chen climbed out, holding a covered casserole dish. I'm sorry to interrupt, she called out, but I saw all the cars and thought you might need dinner. She approached with a careful smile of someone trying to gauge a situation. Is everything all right, dear? Derek and I exchanged glances. Margaret's son had just accused us of conspiracy, and here she was bringing us comfort food. Everything's fine, Mrs. Chen, I lied. Just working out some details about the renovation. She handed me the casserole dish, but her eyes were concerned. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking, but Robert mentioned he thought there might be some irregularities with today's sale. I told him he was being ridiculous, but the kindness in her voice made this so much worse. She was trying to defend me to her own son, not knowing that her son's suspicions might be justified, even if his conclusions were wrong. Mrs. Chen, I bought this house legitimately at a public auction, I said, which was technically true. I understand Robert might have questions about how I knew to bid, but I can assure you everything was above board. She nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. Well, I hope it all works out. Eleanor would want this house to be happy again. As she walked back to her own yard, Jake lowered his voice. Sarah, we need to assume the FBI knows about your conversation with Margaret today, knows about Robert's concerns, knows about your business relationship with Derek. They're going to come at you hard tomorrow. The weight of what I'd done was finally hitting me. In my quest to reclaim my family legacy, I'd created a situation that could destroy everything I'd actually earned. My business, my reputation, my freedom, all of it was now at risk because I couldn't let go of my grandmother's rejection. What are my chances? I asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. If you tell the truth and can prove your motivations were personal rather than criminal? Probably good. But federal investigations have a way of taking on their own momentum. Even innocent people get crushed under the weight of the process. As darkness fell over Maple Hill, I sat on the porch of the house I'd fought so hard to win, wondering if it would end up costing me everything else that actually mattered. The meeting with Patricia Rees at 8 a.m. did nothing to calm my nerves. Her downtown office screamed expensive, mahogany everything, law books that probably cost more than my truck, and a view of the federal building where I'd be sitting across from FBI agents in exactly 47 minutes. The good news, Patricia said, reviewing my documents with surgical precision, is that your paper trail supports personal motivation rather than criminal conspiracy. The bad news is that the timing looks incredibly suspicious to anyone who doesn't know the family dynamics. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of confidence that came from winning cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. Jake had warned me she wasn't cheap, but looking at the federal building across the street, cheap wasn't what I needed right now. What's my biggest vulnerability? I asked. Robert Chen's narrative. If he's convinced the FBI that you had inside information about the environmental issues, the permit problems, the foundation work, things that scared off other bidders, they're going to want to know how you knew to ignore those red flags. Because I grew up in that house. I knew which problems were real and which were cosmetic. Can you prove that? Do you have documentation of time spent there, repairs you helped with, knowledge that predates the foreclosure? I thought about it. Photo albums, maybe. Grandma Eleanor documented everything. And the neighbors, Margaret Chen, others, they knew I spent summers there. Good. We'll need character witnesses who can establish your long-term connection to the property. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. But Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. The LLC you created to make the purchase, Maple Holdings. When exactly did you establish that entity? My stomach dropped. 6 weeks ago. Right after I found out about the foreclosure notice. Patricia's pen stopped moving. 6 weeks before the auction, you created a limited liability company with Maple in the name to purchase a property on Maple Hill Drive. You understand how that's going to look? I did understand. It looked like I'd been planning this specific purchase for over a month, which contradicted my story about the bid being a spontaneous family decision. Is there any way to explain? We don't explain. We tell the truth and let the facts speak for themselves. Patricia's voice was firm. The moment you start trying to massage the timeline or downplay your planning, you look guilty of something. Your motivations were personal, your methods were legal, and your knowledge came from family history. That's our story because it happens to be true. 20 minutes later, we walked across the street to the federal building. The security checkpoint, the elevator ride to the 14th floor, the sterile waiting room with its government-issued furniture, everything reinforced that I was way out of my depth. Agent Morrison turned out to be younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of methodical intensity that made me understand why Derek had been so rattled. His partner, Agent Williams, took notes while Morrison asked the questions. Ms. Mitchell, help us understand the timeline here. When did you first learn about your cousin's financial difficulties with the inherited property? Patricia had coached me on this. Stick to facts, don't speculate about Derek's motivations, don't volunteer information beyond what they asked. Derek mentioned property tax concerns at my grandmother's funeral in February, I said. He asked if I knew anyone who might be interested in renting the space. And what did you tell him? That I'd ask around. Morrison made a note. Did you ask around? I made some inquiries about the rental market in that area, yes. This was where the truth became uncomfortable. I had made inquiries, not to help Derek, but to understand his situation better. The distinction mattered legally, but it felt like splitting hairs morally. When did you first consider purchasing the property yourself? I glanced at Patricia, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. When I realized Derek was going to lose it to foreclosure. That house has been in my family for 4 generations. The idea of it going to strangers was. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Unacceptable. Agent Morrison leaned forward slightly. Ms. Mitchell, we understand you work in real estate investment. In your professional opinion, was $340,000 a fair market value for that property? The loaded question I'd been dreading. Answer too low, and I looked like I was taking advantage. Answer too high, and they'd want to know why other investors hadn't seen the value I saw. Given the condition issues, permit complications, and environmental concerns, I believed it was a reasonable purchase price for someone willing to invest in extensive renovations. Environmental concerns, Agent Williams spoke for the first time. Can you elaborate on what you knew about potential contamination issues? My blood turned cold. They knew about the dry cleaner. Which meant they'd done their homework on every aspect of this property. I was aware of the historical commercial use of adjacent properties, I said carefully. Due diligence in real estate investment includes researching potential environmental liabilities. When did you conduct this due diligence? Patricia's hand touched my arm, a subtle warning. This was a moment where the truth could either save me or bury me completely. I researched the property history over several weeks leading up to the auction, I said, keeping my voice steady. Standard practice for any investment I'm considering. Agent Morrison exchanged a look with his partner that made my chest tighten. Ms. Mitchell, we've spoken with several other bidders from that auction. None of them were aware of the environmental concerns until after the sale. How did you gain access to information they didn't have? The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to spring. Patricia had warned me this was coming, but sitting in that sterile federal office, I felt the full weight of how bad this looked. I have relationships with various city departments through my work, I said. Environmental assessments, zoning issues, permit histories, these are all public records, but knowing where to look and who to ask gives me an advantage in my business. Which department specifically? I named the contacts I'd used: Marcus in City Planning, the Environmental Office, the Historical Society. All legitimate sources, all public information, but presented in a way that made it sound like I had some kind of insider network. Agent Williams looked up from his notes. Mr. Robert Chin suggested you might have had advance knowledge of the foreclosure timeline. He indicated the sale moved faster than typical for properties of this value. My heart hammered against my ribs. Robert Chen hadn't just questioned my bidding, he'd implied I'd somehow manipulated the foreclosure process itself. I monitor foreclosure listings as part of my business, I said. When I saw the property listed, I began preparing to bid. I had no influence over the timeline. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying me with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Help us understand your relationship with Derek Mitchell during this period. Did you offer to help him avoid foreclosure? The loaded question I'd been dreading. The honest answer, that I deliberately watched Derek struggle without offering help, would make me look callous but not criminal. Lying about it would be perjury. Derek didn't ask me for help, I said, which was technically true. He'd asked for rental contacts and investor referrals, but never directly asked me to bail him out. But you were aware he was struggling financially? Yes. And you chose not to intervene? Patricia's voice cut in smoothly. Agent Morrison, unless you're suggesting my client had some legal obligation to prevent her cousin's financial difficulties, I'm not sure how this line of questioning relates to your investigation. Morrison nodded acknowledgement but pressed on. Ms. Mitchell, did you ever discuss the federal investigation into William Mitchell's activities with your cousin Derek? This was new territory. They were connecting the Uncle Bill situation to my purchase more directly than I'd expected. Derek mentioned it yesterday, after I'd already bought the property. I wasn't aware of any federal investigation before then. You had no knowledge that renovations to the property in 2018 might have been funded through questionable means? None whatsoever. Agent Williams flipped through his notes. According to our records, you visited the property multiple times in the weeks before the auction. What was the purpose of those visits? My mouth went dry. They'd been watching me. Somehow, they knew I'd driven by the house, maybe even knew I'd talked to Margaret Chen in the garden. I was assessing the condition of the property for bidding purposes, I said. And, it's my family home. I have emotional attachment to the place. Did you enter the property during these visits? No. Derek still owned it at that time. Morrison made another note, then closed his folder with the deliberate motion of someone ending a scene. Ms. Mitchell, we may have follow-up questions as our investigation continues. Please don't leave the city without notifying us, and any changes to your contact information should be reported immediately. As we left the federal building, Patricia was quiet until we reached the street corner. Then she turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. Sarah, they know more than they're saying. Those questions about your visits to the property, the timing of your LLC formation, your relationships with city contacts, they've been building a file on you for weeks. The implications hit me like ice water. Weeks? How is that possible? Because someone besides Robert Chen has been feeding them information. Someone who's been watching you watch Derek. The question is who, and what they hope to gain from it. As we walked back to Patricia's office, my mind raced through everyone who might have been watching me. The real estate community was smaller than people realized, but turning someone into the FBI required more than professional jealousy. Patricia, what kind of information are we talking about? How detailed could their surveillance be? She pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. Detailed enough that they knew about your property visits before Derek even mentioned them. Someone's been documenting your activities and reporting back. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, emergency. Meet me at the office now. Don't go home first. The urgency in his message made my stomach drop. Patricia saw my expression and gestured toward her car. I'm driving. Whatever this is, you don't want to handle it alone. Jake's office was in chaos when we arrived. Papers covered every surface, his computer displayed multiple browser tabs, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days rather than hours. Sarah, we have a massive problem, he said without preamble. I've been digging into the Uncle Bill situation, trying to understand the federal angle. And? Bill wasn't just laundering money for himself. He was part of a larger operation that's been under federal investigation for 3 years. The FBI has been tracking every property, every renovation, every financial transaction connected to anyone in his network. Patricia stepped forward. What does that mean for Sarah? Jake pulled up a document on his screen. It means they've been watching this house since 2018. Every owner, every transaction, every person who showed unusual interest in the property. Sarah's name has been in their files since the day she inherited nothing. The room spun slightly. They've been watching me for months? Longer. They flagged you when Derek started struggling with the property taxes. Someone with real estate expertise suddenly taking interest in a house under federal scrutiny? That's exactly the pattern they're looking for. My phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen, and Jake gestured for me to answer on speaker. Sarah, where are you? Derek's voice was tight with panic. FBI agents are at Emma's parents' house. They're asking about communications between us, about any business arrangements we might have discussed. Derek, slow down. What kind of communications? Text messages, phone calls, even that conversation we had in the courthouse parking lot. Someone recorded it, Sarah. They have audio of us talking right after the auction. The walls felt like they were closing in. Someone had been close enough to record our conversation outside the courthouse, which meant they'd been following one or both of us for weeks. Patricia grabbed the phone. Derek, this is Patricia Reeves, Sarah's attorney. Don't answer any more questions without legal representation. Don't sign anything, don't volunteer any information. Do you understand? Yes, but they're saying if I cooperate, if I help them understand Sarah's involvement, they might consider reducing charges. What charges? Patricia's voice cut like ice. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Conspiracy to conceal assets subject to federal seizure. They think we planned this whole thing together to hide money from Uncle Bill's operation. Jake was already pulling up federal sentencing guidelines on his computer. The numbers made my vision blur. If convicted on conspiracy charges, I could be looking at years in federal prison. Derek, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, you know we didn't plan anything together. You know I found out about your situation and made my own decisions. I know that, but they have evidence that makes it look different. Sarah, they have photos of you watching the house. They have records of your research into the environmental issues. They know exactly when you formed that LLC and why. The FBI had built a comprehensive case based on circumstantial evidence that painted me as a co-conspirator in something I'd never even known was happening. My perfectly legal revenge plot had intersected with Uncle Bill's criminal operation in ways that made me look guilty of federal crimes. Patricia ended the call and turned to face me with the expression of someone about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. Sarah, we need to discuss plea options. The word plea hit me like a physical blow. 24 hours ago, I'd been celebrating the successful acquisition of my family home. Now my lawyer was suggesting I negotiate with federal prosecutors about crimes I didn't even understand. Patricia, I didn't conspire with anyone. I bought a house at a public auction with my own money. I believe you. But belief doesn't win federal cases. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. The FBI has constructed a narrative where you and Derek worked together to manipulate the foreclosure timeline, hide assets from federal seizure, and profit from Uncle Bill's criminal enterprise. Even if that narrative is completely wrong, it's built on facts that are all technically true. Jake looked up from his computer screen, his face grim. Sarah, there's something else. I've been tracking the ownership history of properties connected to Bill's operation. 3 other houses were sold at foreclosure auctions in the past 2 years. In each case, they were purchased by someone with real estate experience for significantly below market value. My stomach dropped. What happened to those buyers? 2 pled guilty to conspiracy charges. The third is currently serving 18 months in federal prison. The pattern was becoming clear. The FBI had developed a playbook for these cases, and I'd walked directly into it. My expertise in real estate, my family connection, my strategic timing, everything that had made me successful in this purchase now made me look like a career criminal. Patricia's phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID before answering. Morrison? Yes, she's with me. When? I see. We'll be there. She hung up and turned to me with an expression I'd hoped never to see from my attorney. Agent Morrison wants another meeting. This afternoon. He says they've received additional information that changes the scope of their investigation. What kind of additional information? He wouldn't specify, but Sarah, when federal agents call for emergency meetings, it's never good news. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or this gets worse for everyone. I showed the message to Patricia and Jake. Patricia immediately started dialing. We're reporting this to the FBI right now. Witness intimidation is a federal crime, and whoever sent this just made a significant mistake. While Patricia spoke with Agent Morrison about the threatening text, Jake continued his research into the other foreclosure cases. What he found made everything infinitely worse. Sarah, look at this. The common thread in all these cases isn't just real estate expertise. It's family connections to Bill's operation. Every buyer who got prosecuted was related to someone in his network. But I barely knew Uncle Bill. I hadn't seen him in years. Doesn't matter. Your family, you have real estate knowledge, and you purchased property that was improved with laundered money. In the FBI's algorithm, that makes you part of the conspiracy. Patricia finished her call and walked back over. The threatening text came from a burner phone, but they're taking it seriously. Morrison says it suggests someone else is involved in this situation, someone who doesn't want certain information coming to light. Someone else? Like who? That's what we're going to find out. But Sarah, there's something Morrison told me that changes everything. The additional information they received? It came from inside the real estate community. Someone who claims to have direct knowledge of your planning process. My mind raced through possibilities. Who in my professional network had known about my interest in the mansion? Who had access to my research methods, my contact list, my business practices? The answer hit me like a sledgehammer. Jake, who else knew I was planning to bid on that property? His face went pale. You said you kept it completely secret. I did. But someone had to handle the LLC paperwork, the banking arrangements, the bidding registration. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. Someone who had access to all my documentation, who understood exactly how I operate. Patricia grabbed my arm. Sarah, who are you thinking of? I found the name I was looking for and showed them the screen. My business partner for 3 years, the person who'd helped me build my real estate portfolio, who knew every strategy one used and every contact I'd developed. The person who'd been asking increasingly detailed questions about my activities for the past 6 months. Marcus Chen. Robert Chen's nephew. The revelation hit like a lightning bolt, illuminating everything I'd missed. Marcus Chen, my trusted contact in city planning, Robert's nephew, Margaret's grandson. The same Marcus who'd helped me research zoning laws, who'd warned me about the Airbnb permit issues, who'd had access to every piece of information I'd gathered about the mansion. He played me, I whispered, sinking into Jake's office chair. Marcus fed me just enough information to make me confident about bidding, then turned around and reported everything to his uncle Robert. When Robert got suspicious about my successful bid, Marcus had a complete record of my research to hand over to the FBI. Patricia was already dialing Agent Morrison. This changes everything. If Marcus Chen was feeding information to multiple parties, he's not just a witness, he's potentially orchestrating this entire situation. While she explained our discovery to the FBI, Jake pulled up Marcus's employment records. Sarah, look at this. Marcus has been flagged for ethics violations twice in the past year. Both times for sharing confidential city information with private parties. My phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. Patricia gestured for me to answer on speaker while she stayed on the line with Morrison. Sarah, I heard about the FBI meeting, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. What kind of heads up? There might be some questions about our working relationship. About information I provided regarding the Maple Hill property. I wanted you to know I've been completely honest with the authorities about everything. The casual way he said it, like he was doing me a favor by reporting me to federal agents, made my blood boil. Marcus, did you tell your Uncle Robert about my research into the environmental issues? A pause. Robert asked me some questions about local investors. I might have mentioned that you'd been looking into properties in that area. Before or after the auction? Sarah, I think you should focus on your legal situation rather than before or after, Marcus? Another pause, longer this time. Before. But Sarah, I was just trying to help Uncle Robert understand the local market dynamics. Patricia made a cutting gesture across her throat, and I understood. Marcus had just admitted to sharing confidential information that gave his uncle an unfair advantage in the bidding process. More importantly, he'd admitted to monitoring my activities and reporting them to other parties. Agent Morrison's voice came through Patricia's phone. We're sending units to pick up Marcus Chen for questioning. Ms. Mitchell, we need you to keep him on the line. Marcus, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, I'm curious about something. How did you know the foreclosure timeline so precisely? Derek said even he was surprised by how fast it moved. I had access to the county records. It's part of my job to track these things. But you specifically warned me about permit issues that scared off other bidders. How did you know those would be problems? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, Sarah, I think this conversation should wait until you have proper legal representation. I have legal representation. She's sitting right here. And she's very interested in how you managed to have such detailed knowledge of federal investigations that hadn't been made public yet. Patricia held up her phone, showing me a text from Morrison, units in position. Keep talking. Marcus, the FBI is very curious about how you knew to connect my property purchase to Uncle Bill's money laundering operation. That information wasn't public record. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because Agent Morrison has a very interesting theory about someone who had access to city records, family connections to other bidders, and advanced knowledge of federal investigations. Someone who might have been playing multiple sides for personal gain. Through the phone, I heard what sounded like a car door slamming. Sarah, I have to go. Marcus, wait. The line went dead. Patricia's phone immediately rang. Morrison here. We have him. And Ms. Mitchell? We found something very interesting in his car. Financial records showing payments from 3 different sources for information about property auctions, including a very substantial payment from someone connected to Uncle Bill's operation. The room spun slightly as the implications sank in. Marcus hadn't just been reporting my activities, he'd been selling information to multiple parties, including criminals trying to stay ahead of federal investigations. Agent Morrison, Patricia said, I believe this significantly changes the nature of your investigation into my client. It does indeed. Ms. Mitchell, we'll need a complete statement about your interactions with Marcus Chen, but I think it's safe to say you're no longer a target of this investigation. You're a victim of it. After Patricia hung up, the 3 of us sat in stunned silence. In less than 4 hours, I'd gone from federal conspiracy suspect to victim of a corruption scheme I'd never even known existed. So what happens now? I asked. Jake grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in days. Now you get to restore your grandmother's house without worrying about federal prison. Though you still have to deal with the historical preservation bureaucracy. And Marcus? Patricia's expression was grim. Marcus is looking at federal charges for corruption, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The FBI has been building a case against the information brokers in Uncle Bill's network for months. Your situation just handed them the evidence they needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. FBI says the investigation is shifting away from us. Emma's making dinner. Want to come over and figure out how to fix this family mess? I looked at the message, then at the deed to 1247, Maple Hill Drive still sitting in my briefcase. The house I'd fought so hard to reclaim, the victory that had nearly destroyed everything I'd actually earned. Patricia, what are my legal obligations regarding the property now? None. It's yours, purchased legitimately at a public auction. The federal investigation was into Marcus's corruption scheme, not your purchase. Jake stood up, stretching. So the question is, what do you want to do with a 6,000 square foot Victorian mansion that needs about $200,000 in renovations? I thought about Grandma Eleanor's rose garden, choked with weeds. About the bay window where she used to sit doing crossword puzzles. About 4 generations of family history that Derek had been ready to abandon and I'd been willing to manipulate federal agents to reclaim. I want to restore it, I said finally. The right way this time. And I want Derek to help me. 3 months later, Derek and I stood in the mansion's rebuilt kitchen, sharing coffee and planning the garden restoration. The FBI had concluded their investigation, Marcus was awaiting sentencing, and the Historical Preservation Board had approved our renovation plans after only 2 bureaucratic nightmares instead of the anticipated 12. You know what's funny? Derek said, looking out of the rose beds where Emma was teaching their daughter to plant bulbs. Grandma Eleanor would be absolutely furious that we're working together on this. She'd be furious about a lot of things, I agreed. But she'd love seeing the gardens healthy again. The house was slowly coming back to life. The foundation issues were resolved, the environmental testing had come back clean, and we'd found a contractor who understood historical restoration. More importantly, Derek and I had found a way to honor our grandmother's memory while building something better than the bitter family dynamics she'd left behind. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Chen. The roses look beautiful, dear. Eleanor would be so proud. I looked around the kitchen where 4 generations of my family had shared meals, arguments, and dreams. It had cost me almost everything to reclaim this place, had nearly destroyed relationships and sent me to federal prison. And somehow, it had been worth every terrifying moment.